Congresswoman Trahan, thank you so much for joining us today. Just a brief introduction. Congresswoman Trahan represents the 3rd Congressional District in Massachusetts. She serves on the Armed Services and Education and Labor Committees. Prior, some years ago, not many, but some years ago, she was a star high school athlete at Lowell High School, and she earned an athletic scholarship to Georgetown University, where she graduated from the School of Foreign Service. And because of that background, you have a unique perspective as a former college athlete and also now a member of Congress. I'm wondering what interests you most in name, image, and likeness when you look at this topic?
Well, first of all, Michael, thank you for inviting me to join you today on this very important topic. And I have to say, because it is Veterans Day, that I want to thank all of our veterans and their families who are watching. Your service is appreciated today and every day. And Michael, yeah, the NIL topic hits close to home for me. I grew up in Lowell. I went to public schools. I'm the daughter of an iron worker and a domestic worker, and I could have never afforded tuition at Georgetown if it weren't for my volleyball scholarship. In fact, I was the first member of my family to graduate from college. Going to a place like Georgetown, it opened up so many doors for me, really broadened the possibilities. And I think that's the case with so many of the student athletes that we're talking about. Playing volleyball for me was the ticket to many opportunities that arose from that education. It was a tremendous amount of work, but it's a labor of love. And those memories of playing in the Big East with my teammates and my closest friends, they're precious. But I'll tell you what really opened my eyes to the NIL policy discussion was hearing from Grant Hill earlier this year recount the story to my colleagues and me on Capitol Hill about how he wanted to simply buy his father a game jersey in the school store, and he couldn't afford it. And it struck me as a violation of fundamental fairness. I don't begrudge universities wanting to ensure that their student athletes are students first. In fact, I share that view. But how could it be justifiable for a student athlete to be on posters and expensive TV ads and yet be unable to even afford their own jersey as a gift? So, I'm glad that the NCAA is coming to terms on this important issue, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
So when name, image, and likeness is talked about, it's usually in the context of football and men's basketball. Your experience was, of course, on the women's volleyball team. How do you see name, image, and likeness from the perspective for women's sports?
So provided that it's done properly, I see NIL as a real opportunity to increase exposure and interest in women's sports and hopefully open more doors for young women to even consider a professional career in sports if they so choose. Division I football and basketball programs, they garner so much attention and money, in part because of the quality of the competition, it being so high, but it's also because big programs are a farm system for the pros. So fans of someone like Allen Iverson become aware of his spectacular talent at Georgetown and then continue to root for him and buy his jersey when he goes to the 76ers, even if that fan doesn't really care for the Sixers, but they just love Al. You've covered minor league baseball. It's a lot like watching a future Red Sox star player play for the Spinners in Lowell with the hopes that they'll see them at Fenway one day. You get invested in watching young talent grow. So when I think of my experience, the competition in women's sports is just as fierce. I played with and against some great female athletes, but apart from something like the WNBA draft or the Olympics, there generally isn't a lot of opportunity beyond the collegiate level for women. And if NIL helps to attract eyeballs to women's sports at the collegiate level, then it should offer more opportunities for women, whatever they ultimately choose to do. And fundamentally increasing the value prop for students, girls and boys, I think should be our highest priority. I think it comes first. And I guess the only thing I would add, on a gut level, it feels a bit exploitative that colleges and universities can generate revenue off of the images of their student athletes, but the student athletes themselves have been banned from doing the same. So With all the harm that internet culture does, especially to warping, young women's self-image, NIL could be a way to restore some degree of choice, control, and fairness.
You mentioned Allen Iverson. You were a classmate of Iverson
Yeah.
at Georgetown. Let's say we're in a world where Iverson is signing endorsement deals and making a lot of money. He certainly would have been highly marketable during that time. Whereas you and your teammates, maybe there wouldn't be endorsement opportunities. Would that have created, I don't want to say jealousy or animosity, but how would that have affected the relationship between the athletes in Georgetown who were not Allen Iverson or one of the few basketball players that were very marketable and everyone else? Would that have been a concern, or is it just one of those, that's the marketplace?
I think it's the reality we're already living in today. I mean, when I played at Georgetown, I was fortunate to know and to watch Dikembe Mutombo, Alonzo Mourning, and Allen Iverson, and they were all stars. I mean, there were stars on campus. So much of the campus life centered on those basketball games and on the men's team. So do I think there would be a major difference if these players were able to benefit from getting paid for their NIL? No, I don't think it would even hurt, team dynamics or team cohesion if Allen was paid for his NIL. I mean, star players are already being promoted by the school in a disproportionate way, and the difference is that the student athlete can't participate in that enterprise. So, I remain open to hear the opposite view, but I think as Jay mentioned earlier, we have this in professional sports already, where star QBs get paid dramatically more than the all-important center, and it doesn't seem to hurt team performance. I say all that, and I'm mindful that one of the elements I like about Senator Booker's College Athletes Bill of Rights is the provision to allow student athletes to enter into group licensing deals, so that there's an opportunity for all boats to rise, if you will.
Yeah, and group licensing deal, many would say, is essential to having video games back, which of course we know is of great interest to a lot of sports fans. When you were going back again to college days, you mentioned growing up in Lowell, and that you wouldn't have been able to afford going to Georgetown, obviously a very expensive school, without that scholarship. Let's say there wouldn't have been endorsement opportunities for the volleyball team. Might there have been other things like sponsoring camps? I mean, that's something that I think when we talk about NIL, the focus is endorsement deals, but there are these other ways in which college athletes might be able to earn money. Do you think sponsoring camps is something that you might have been able to do?
That would have been a game changer, and it would have dramatically changed, my experience. I mean, as a Division I athlete, you can't study abroad. You can't work during the week, or even really pursue an unpaid internship, because the commitment to the school is just so great. But for young people like me, when you did have the time, and that was basically during school breaks or the summer, we had to earn money. I waited tables at TGI Fridays during the summer months, and I would have given anything to have spent my summers training young girls at volleyball camps. One of the reasons why I went back to Lowell High School to coach my high school varsity team after graduating was to show young girls in my hometown like what's possible. So I think girls need and they want that role model. Girls who, women who look like them, were raised like them, so that they can dream and aspire, to become more. So I think about my experience. There was exactly one volleyball publication, Volleyball Monthly, when I was, when I was young. And today that's completely different, right? We have social media that can provide a unique opportunity to reach more young girls and women with a positive message and a pathway to sports. And I think that can be incredibly powerful as we consider NIL, excuse me, and just think about the possibilities for future generations.
Let's take the NCAA's perspective for a moment. Until recently, for years, the NCAA has argued that if college athletes can sign endorsement deals, that fans will be less interested in college sports, that the players will seem too much like minor league players or pro athletes, that part of the attraction to college sports is this, many would say, sort of facade, but the idea that there's an innocence, that they're amateurs. Meanwhile, the coaches, of course, are making a lot of money, but there's that perception. And there's also the issue of agents, that if agents come on campus, that will somehow create problems for schools. Do you worry at all about those issues? Is that something that members of Congress, in looking at NIL legislation, should be factoring?
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's an illegitimate concern. I'm sure there are some fans who would prefer keeping things as purely amateur as possible. But it seems to me that the horse is already long out of the barn. Does it reduce interest in college sports when schools sell naming rights to commercial entities? Does it harm interest in college sports when a school has a contract with a particular shoe company so that everyone wears Nike or Adidas? I guess I'd just be surprised if allowing these young people to sign endorsement deals would turn many people off. I think collegiate sports are already chock full of commercial interests. The only difference is that the student athlete would be able to benefit directly under NIL.
Some have described NIL as a matter of economic liberty, that we're
Mm.
Americans, we should be able to make money. John Mayer, when he went to the Berkeley School of Music, could still go to college and sign a record deal. The Olsen twins could go on to NYU after making a lot of money on a Full House. We can find all sorts of examples in acting and music. But with sports, of course, there's a sense that once you make money, you somehow can't also play a college sport and be eligible. Uh, with that in mind, do you view it as an economic issue? Others would say it's more of a civil rights issue, that the two sports that generate by far the most amount of revenue for college sports, football and men's basketball, are disproportionately African American. How do you view that?
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent question. There is no question that our country is going through a long overdue reckoning on race this year. I think one of the major takeaways has been the need to pay much greater attention to systemic inequities and failures whenever and wherever they arise. Those that stem from, manifestly racist policies like a poll tax or redlining, but as well as those that may not have those origins, but nevertheless have, disparate and insidious effects. And when it comes to NIL, we really have to consider the fact that, as you noted, young Black men are overrepresented in these big sports, and yet they are underrepresented among the coaching staff. I mean, there was testimony delivered to the Senate Commerce Committee over the summer, where Professor Dion Culler, who is the director of the University of Baltimore Center for Sport and Law, shared that in Division I, 56% of men's basketball players were Black, and in contrast, most coaches and administrators are white. Similarly, in football, nearly half of the players are Black, while the vast majority of coaches and staff, right down to the graduate assistants, are white. So I think we have to approach this matter with a high degree of sensitivity, particularly on behalf of those who won't ever go pro, but really need and deserve the ability to monetize their images and participate in that economic opportunity.
And you mentioned, I mean, what percent actually go on to play pro sports, right? And that's, as you just said, it's their moment is in college. If they don't
Yeah.
earn during that time, it's gone. And I think that's an important point that definitely warrants attention with NIL. Jay and Scott were talking about how states have already adopted NIL statutes, and others are in the process of doing so. We also know, you referenced Senator Booker's uh, civil rights for college athletes, prospective
Mhm.
legislation, and other members of Congress, including Republicans, have offered NIL related legislation. Do you think Congress is going to act or should act before those state statutes take effect, which is as early as next July? And you've been a leader in sports. You uh, are in charge of the Save Minor League Baseball Task Force. I know that you've been a leader in trying to prevent baseball from contracting minor league teams. Where do you see your role in this, and where do you see this issue playing out?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I am optimistic and extremely motivated by the opportunity for Congress to act. I mean, to be honest, we're still weighing the pros and cons of the various approaches that have been put forth, but I am excited about the level of activity at both the state and the federal levels, and there are elements of several of the bills that have been filed that I really like. The Bipartisan Student Athlete Equity Act would deny the NCAA's tax exempt status if it substantially restricts a student athlete's ability to be compensated for NIL. I mentioned Senator Booker's College Athletes Bill of Rights. There's a number of elements in there, and one that I like is including that provision to allow student athletes to enter into group licensing deals. And that could be especially valuable for players that aren't going to go pro, as you said, but that would earn some much needed money during their collegiate careers. Additionally, oops, did I just lose you? Oh,
no, I see.
Additionally, I think the value proposition for the students must always come first. So whether we use, carrots or sticks or some combination of the two, NCAA rules on NIL must meet the needs of students. That said, I can also be persuaded that some degree of federal preemption of state laws may be necessary if we're trying to preserve some version of, national championship system. Then we can't have colleges in state A effectively juicing their programs when that isn't permitted in state B, for example. So I think that there is a role, for the federal government to play, and I think it's really important that we're having this, this conversation now.
Well, Congresswoman Trahan, thank you so much for your time. We're very appreciative, and we're looking forward to having more conversations with you about this topic, and I'm going to turn it back over to Scott.
But wait, Mike, you didn't tell me, Congresswoman, he didn't tell me you were a Georgetown alum when we planned this whole thing. I'm a Syracuse guy. So this does not bode well for future interactions. But I will point out, in the 6 degrees of separation, we went from the Olsen twins to the Twin Towers of Mutombo and Morning, right? Which is good. I will tell you, one of my favorite athletes is the Junkyard Dog, Jerome Williams.
Yeah.
One of the good guys. And you got to love, later on, we do have our friend Rick Burton from Syracuse, from the David Falk School. David Falk represented, of course, Patrick Ewing. So, Hoya Saxa, Congresswoman, we appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.